let's talk about some of y'all's Gojo and Sukuna theories. But if you're not caught up on the manga, we'll see you in the next one. Alright, so first up today, Chris wanted me to react to his theory that Gojo is going to come back and defeat Sukuna with an open domain. Now, y'all feel free to pause and read Chris's full thoughts if you would like to. But my response to this is that I obviously think Gojo's coming back as well. I'm sure you guys have, know my thoughts on it at this point. But I don't think he would come back just to kind of Deus Ex Machina destroy Sukuna, be the heroic savior figure in that way. Now, obviously, if Gojo comes back, he's clearly going to be a big role in defeating Sukuna. I just don't think it's going to be the moment of like he goes Super Saiyan and, casts Lime Green for the first time and one-shots him, or an open domain as opposed to Lime Green. Just because I think Gojo's whole character arc, if he comes back, is to serve the purpose that he is no longer the strongest. He is instead Gojo for the first time, which in my opinion would mean him working together with people to take down Sukuna as opposed to just doing it himself with one powerful move type of thing. Now, that is entirely my opinion and could be completely wrong, of course. That's just my 2 cents on it. So for that reason, I don't really see him coming back with the open domain to just win the day. Now, could he come back with the open domain and that serve some purpose in helping to take down Sukuna by means of maybe just canceling out Sukuna's domain? I could see something like that, because in their first fight, their domains didn't cancel out, which we know is what normally happens if there's a domain clash, right? Either one overpowers the other, or they would just kind of nullify each other. But that didn't happen in this case because Sukuna's was open and Gojo's was closed. If they both had open domains, we're not really sure how that would interact, right? Because, again, the only reason they could coexist is because they were different. If they were both open, I would assume that they would just completely nullify each other, or they would similarly coexist as we already saw it, in which case, why even give Gojo an open domain? Because it's not doing anything different than it already did. Now, I'm starting to yap a lot about this, so I'll try to wrap it up, but I could see Gojo getting an open domain. I just don't think it's the win con, and on top of that, I don't necessarily know what its purpose would be, because the open domain, the biggest benefit of it, right, is that it's so much larger. And Gojo's not really trying to catch anyone else in his domain, especially if other people are around at this point in the fight, right? Gojo may be less inclined to do an open domain than ever before. And a final little thing I'll mention is that you talk about Maharaga potentially getting caught in the open domain because it's unexpected. If Maharaga somehow came back, it wouldn't matter if the domain was open or not, because he's already been adapted to Unlimited Void via Megami taking on that burden in Sukuna's soul. So that is why Maharaga was able to still independently act when Sukuna got caught in the Unlimited Void. Maharaga was already adapted to it, and my best guess is that there was probably some sort of binding vow, and maybe it didn't even have to be a binding vow, but previous command from Sukuna, i.e. like, if I get hit with Unlimited Void or if I get knocked unconscious, you are to immediately act. So that's kind of what I think was at play there. Next up, I got asked to react to this theory from Regen over in our Discord, and come join the Discord, by the way. But Regen gives a thorough breakdown on perhaps how Sukuna was able to cut Gojo with the world-cutting slash. So as always, y'all feel free to read this whole thing for the full breakdown, but essentially what he's saying is we know Sukuna can send out a dismantle, and it doesn't have to come directly like from his person. He can create the starting coordinates of the dismantle further away from himself, and we see this in the Kashimo fight and a bunch of other times throughout the anime, honestly. So with that being the case, and also what we learned in this most recent chapter, that Sukuna can send out a slash without moving his hands, Kusakabe, takes note of this, that combined with the idea that he perhaps did a binding vow to forego the requirements of chanting and hand signs. All of those things combined could have made it so Sukuna sends out a world-cutting slash that basically appears right on Gojo, since they were standing rather close to one another, and then, it cut through his infinity without any warning because of the binding vow, and because he didn't need to move to start the attack like we learned from the most recent chapter. So I'm yapping, but hopefully you're tracking with me there, and yeah, I 100% agree. If you guys have seen my previous videos, you know the idea that I have been working with was there was a binding vow involved that, got rid of the hand signs and chants, and so now combined with the fact that we know Sukuna doesn't even have to move, this makes sense. Not only was Gojo literally caught off guard by something bypassing his infinity, but he might not have had that much time to react to it to begin with. Next up, Greek wants me to react to the theory that Sukuna's curse technique is actually construction, just like Yorozu and Mai, and that he has just been using the curse technique reversal of that in order to cut things apart with cleave and dismantle. Adding on that dismantle is literally an antonym for construction. So I personally don't believe that that specifically would be the case, and here's why. I think that Sukuna could certainly have a deconstruction curse technique, if you will. Like that could be the general idea behind it. But if so, I think that would be his normal curse technique and not the reversal. I say that because I, one, think that a character like Gojo, especially, but then also like highly intelligent analytical characters like Kusakabe, for example, would have been able to tell that Sukuna was using the curse technique reversal, and there would have been some mention of it. Now, you could argue that maybe Gojo, even with his six eyes, can't tell when somebody is using positive versus negative cursed energy, but to me, I think he would be able to, especially given everything else we know that those eyes are capable of. That seems like it wouldn't be too much of a tall order. So I feel like Gojo would, at some point, would have mentioned, like, hey, he's using his curse technique reversal, not his normal one, right? Also, we know that in the domain is cleave and dismantle, right? Which I've even theorized that it could be possible to imbue reverse curse techniques into your domain, but we haven't seen that yet. So while it is possible, I still just think it's less likely because there would have been some mention of it, especially from someone like Gojo. But also on top of that, we know that Yuta Okotsu, who can copy techniques, copied Sukuna's technique and used cleave, right? So is it possible for Akotsu to replicate somebody's reverse or curse technique reversal? I think so, yes. But given how his domain work with picking up the swords and stuff, it's implied that all of those are just the normal curse technique versions and not reversals. So for that reason, I don't think that's specifically the way it's working here. But again, I do think we could find out that his technique revolves around deconstruction. Next up, we've got another theory on Sukuna's curse technique, this time from Eric, and he wants to know what my thoughts are on the idea of it being acceleration. AKA, we're talking the concepts of physics, right? Like cleave and dismantle could be the wind accelerating so fast it's a slashing attack, and something like the fire arrow could be due to immense friction. So I think this is certainly possible, right? I like any idea that tries to combine all three of those things under one conceptual roof. And acceleration at least makes sense, right? So I could see it being something like that. Now, is it definitively? No, because there's still just so much we don't know, right? The black box, the fire arrow, that could be its own technique that somehow these things are under, similar to acceleration. Like the black box could be some like generalized concept that involves all of those things, or it could be something else entirely, right? It could be some sort of copy effect like Yuta Okotsu, or some sort of storage effect that he is able to store other techniques or abilities in. I think all of these things are a valid possibility, and it's just impossible to tell right now. We really need some more information, which we should be getting in the coming chapters. But again, I think this is a valid possibility at least. Next up, we've got this theory from Unwana on how Yuji is going to get Sukuna's curse technique, dating back to what Gojo said at the very beginning of this manga, right? And I love the analogy you use here. He compares Yuji to a cursed tool, the same way a cursed tool will eventually be imbued with a curse technique. Maybe, too, that's what's happening to Yuji. And he brings up how Nanami's cleaver now has the ratio technique, right? So I could 100% see the connection there, and that may be the same process, if we want to call it that, of what's happening to Yuji. Now, he brings up the small scar that Sukuna gets on his finger after taking over Megami's body, and if that perhaps could be Yuji even unknowingly being imbued with Sukuna's curse technique at that point and having slashed him. I think that's certainly possible, but that moment is still so vague. We don't really know what's going on there. Is it something Yuji did? Is it something Megami did? It's hard to say. So I'm waiting for more until I say yes on that. But again, I love the analogy, and I think that's a fair way to think of how Yuji's going to get the technique. And finally, this isn't a theory, but Zachariah sent in a question and wanted to know Ten Shadows Sukuna and Maharaga versus Yuta and Rika, who would win? And it's not close at all. Sukuna absolutely slams. We know that he and Gojo are just on such a different level from everyone else, and it's very arguable that this version of Sukuna is stronger than the Heian era form. We're not going to get into that here, but Yuta cannot hold a candle to full power Sukuna, much less if we're going to throw Maharaga in the fight as well. So yeah, absolutely slams. Anyways, if you made it this far, I appreciate you, and thank you guys so much for the support. I will see you in the next one.